Welcome. I'm Lori Lee Binstock, and you're listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. In my effort to bring awareness to those who have suffered from trauma and PTSD, as well as honor our veterans in a month dedicated to their service to this country, I want to continue the conversation. Just this year, the number of suicides of active military has increased 20% than in previous years, and a 30% spike in the military. According to the Associated Press, to combat this, Army leaders are looking at shortening combat deployments. Joining me to talk more about these invisible wounds plaguing many in the military is Army veteran Tom Voss, mental health advocate for fellow veterans and author of Where the War Ends. Tom, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So you've written this poignant memoir titled Where the War Ends, detailing your journey to begin your healing from PTSD. Could you tell me a little bit about the trauma you experienced in the military?
So I deployed to Mosul, Iraq. I was active duty Army from 2003 to 2006, then deployed to Mosul, Iraq 2004 to 2005. That was some of the most intense fighting that was going on in the Iraq War at that time. So when I deployed, I was 20 years old. Just had about a year of training before we went, and when we went there, everything that we experienced in training, at least this was my experience, that it didn't really prepare you for actual combat. So. Through that process, my platoon sergeant was killed in action. One of our squad leaders was killed in action. I took a RPG, or rocket propelled grenade shrapnel, to the head while I was there, and I got knocked unconscious. So there's a lot of different things on top of the personal loss. You see a lot of civilian casualties, and a lot of things that you want to help, but you don't have the capacity to, or you have orders for a different mission. I know one of my good friends ended up wanting to help a bunch of people who were wounded by a mortar round, but was given an order not to. So that leads to what I write about in the book called moral injury. Moral injury is when you witness or participate in something that goes against your moral scaffolding or your moral structure, who you are morally. And this is what's inherent in war. So, whether you like it or not, that's kind of, the underlying theme is chaos and stress and sadness and all these things that, you experience in a 12-month period, and you're, working 24/7. So there's no time to really process what you experience. And that's what I tried to at least process in the book, Where War Ends.
When you enlisted into the military, were you aware of the possibility of the trauma from combat?
I mean, you really don't have firsthand experience of war. So, like I said before, the training that you do tries to get you in the ballpark of what you're going to be doing over there, but it doesn't really prepare you for how do you grieve the loss of your friends and still work? How do you process the death of civilians that you're there to protect and serve and all these different things, and you're not able to do that, and you see the aftermath of not being able to protect them. So it's really hard to train people to prepare for that. So one of the things that has helped me a lot is breath work and meditation. And these things are tools to help manage stress. And I think, I'm sure we'll get to this. You'd mentioned shorter deployments. One of the things that is really important to me is having stress management tools. We exercise quite a bit in the military. We do PT and all these different things. But you need a little bit more, based on my experience, to be able to manage the stresses of combat.
And when you say a little bit more, what do you believe that is? I mean, that does sound I can't even picture that, having to deal with losing multiple friends and then just having to go back to work. Is there a down? I mean, I guess it is war. It's like you're hyper vigilant all the time, but do you
Right.
get time to grieve? Is there that opportunity at all for even just a little bit of processing?
Yeah, and keep in mind this was this was years ago, so the military might have new things in place to help manage this. But at the time, when we were deployed, we were given a few days off, and that was mostly so that we could kind of cool down. There's a lot of anger and sadness, and this was an effort so we didn't retaliate for the death of our friends. So they kind of forced us to take a few days off, and in that time we had small memorial services for our friends, and then the following week we were back out again. So you don't really have time to even process what's happening. You're just in action most of the time. So it would be coming back from a 72-hour mission where we were out for 72 hours. We would come back and maybe we would get a meal at the chow hall, and then we would go to sleep, and then within 15 minutes you get a knock on your door to put all your stuff back on. We need to go back out. So it was like that for a year.
And like we were just talking about shortening combat missions, deployments. Do you think that is helpful?
Yes and no. So from my experience, there's a benefit for being there for 12 months because you get to know people in the community, you get to build relationships, you can see the progress that you're making. There was talk when I was there of, why are they pulling this out after 12 months? Let's just stay and just, get a real hold, like get a foothold on this place. And the insurgency at that time knew that every 12 months we'd have another group come in. So they would wait for that group to come in, and then they would watch them, and then they would attack and try to catch these the new incoming troops off guard. So we saw problems with even a 12-month deployment is challenging. So you reduce that, which some units in the military and different branches of the military have 6-month deployments, but that doesn't guarantee less trauma. Something could happen within the first month that could ruin the rest of the 12 months. So although I like the thought of the military putting effort into trying to manage this, I really don't think the duration has that much of an impact on when it comes to a trauma standpoint. So if we're not giving the men and women who are deploying tools to manage the stress personally on a personal level, it's still going to be the same issues, I think.
Okay. What was the hardest part in returning home?
Well, one of the hardest things for me was after I separated from the military, so I was active duty and I was stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington, coming home to Wisconsin where there's no active duty military base in Wisconsin. So I didn't have anyone to connect with. And I think this is where veterans start to feel isolation because of the experience of war and because it's so grand and horrible and amazing and all these different things combined. There's nothing like it to compare it to. And then you come home and no one has that experience. So it was such a bizarre experience for me because I came home from war and had this just unbelievable experience fighting in Iraq. And then I come home and all my friends are doing the exact same thing that they were doing when I left. So I had changed profoundly, and the people around me had not. And it was hard for me to be able to express why I changed and what I experienced when it's an indescribable experience for most people. I mean, you can read all the war stories you want and watch all the movies you want, but until you're being actively shot at or actively hunted down, and roadside bombs and car bombs and all these different things. You don't know the primal fear that goes with all those things. And there was a point in time where, 20 years old, I had to accept my own death. And that actually helped me be a better soldier. And it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but, there was a point where I was like, I'm going to die here. And once I kind of accepted that, it allowed me to kind of free up that fear to move on. So how do I come home and explain that to my friends? How do I explain that to, people who are coming up to me and asking me if I've killed anyone? That's the first thing that, some people want to ask and want to talk about. So it's just like the ignorance behind it. They just don't know the experience. And a lot of them have experience playing video games and all those different things that, they think they know what it's like. But until you're in that situation and you're, face to face with it, it really doesn't, hold water to compare those things. So coming home, I just shoved everything down. I tried to move on with my life and tried to put my military and deployment experience behind me without, giving it a second thought. And that's when things kind of snowball and get out of control. So it was really an isolating experience coming home. And I think a lot of veterans face that. And that's why you can see the suicide epidemic in the veteran community. And I think, the last report that came out, it's 20 veterans a day, averaging out to about a little over every 65 minutes. For veterans taking their life. And some people will say, well, that's older veterans, but it's eventually going to be veterans that are my age. I've lost a couple of friends already to suicide or to combat related incidents. So like alcoholism is a big one too. Prescription medication abuse, all these different things that men and women are using to try to numb themselves from feeling the horrible experiences of combat.
Yeah. Were you able to seek help when you got home?
So, like many veterans, it took me about 2 years to even go in to ask for help. And I didn't even want to go in and talk to anyone. And it was my sister that actually recommended that I go in and talk to someone. So she noticed that I was drinking more, and that I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's hard to pick that out because it's everyone there loves to drink. So she noticed that I wasn't engaging with friends and just kind of muted, and she's understood that there was something else going on, and asked me if I'd go talk to someone. And I told her the only way that I would go talk to someone is if it was a combat veteran and they were deployed to Iraq. And that was my kind of barriers that I put up for her. I'm like, well, if you can find someone who is a social worker that has had similar experiences to what I've had, I'll go. And luckily for me, she found someone. And then I started going in to a vet center. And that was my first experience with going in and seeing a clinical provider for health and for post-traumatic stress.
Well, yeah, I believe that's usually the issue with a lot of people seeking help, is that they want someone who has kind of been down the road that they've been. They don't want to spend their however long their hour trying to educate them, about what's, this is what's happening. I need you to know what's happening, and because I need you to be able to help me.
Right.
What was it that, like, what were the symptoms? I know you said you were drinking, you were isolating. Mm-hmm. Was there anything else where you felt like, I really need to see somebody, but you were just afraid to? Because I feel like that happens a lot for people who have experienced trauma, because they're like, there's no way anyone's going to be able to help me. Did you ever feel that?
Yeah, a little bit that no one would understand the experience. But because of the military training, there's this kind of self-imposed prison, I guess you kind of put yourself in, because we're taught in the infantry that to be strong and not to be a weak link, and rather die honorably than show weakness. So that's kind of ingrained in us going through, and that serves you well when you're in combat and when you're in life and death situations. But when you get out, it doesn't really serve you to not ask for help, to not um, just slowly deteriorate. And that's what happened with me. Was I would destroy relationships, withdraw, isolate myself, and I was suffering from insomnia and flashbacks and all sorts of different things, and adding in risky behaviors as drinking and drug abuse and different things like that, pretty much living like I was already dead. So
Right.
It didn't matter to me what happened to me. So at that point, I was just going through the motions of living my life, and if I didn't wake up, that's fine with me. That was kind of the mentality that I was in.
Wow. And, the book that you wrote, Where the War Ends, you embarked on a 2,700-mile journey. Can you tell me about that? What made you do that? When was it where you said, I need to go big?
Right. Well, it really was out of necessity. At that point, like I said before, a few of my friends had died by suicide. Others had passed away early. And I knew that if I didn't do something, that was going to be me. And at that time, I was contemplating taking my own life. Because why would I want to live a life that, I'm just completely just suffering in silence every day? And
Trapped.
that, yeah, I mean, that mentality is a slippery slope. So I knew I needed to do something that was going to pull me out of the environment that I was in. So, I was caught in the cycle of drinking and, hanging out with people that, all we would do is pretty much drink. And that's, that was the main activity. So I knew that I needed to get away and get out of that environment to really try to process the experiences that I had, because I hadn't at that time had the time to really think about, what did I experience? How did it impact me? I was 20 years old, 21 when I got out of the military. So,
Wow.
really not being able to understand the impact and how it's impacting my life, my family, and these different things. So it was kind of a last ditch effort to say, okay, before I take my own life, I need to make a pact with myself that I'm going to put in some effort to really try to be better and try to understand and try to get well. And at that point, I had been in and out of the VA, going to many different doctors. And it's one of the challenging things about is finding a mental health care provider is, you have to put in the time to find someone that resonates with you. Otherwise it's a challenging process. And I think people get frustrated immediately when they, meet with someone and they're like, oh, this person's not even listening to what I'm saying. And then they just throw their hands up and, I'm done with therapy in general. And so the trek was something to really break out of that cycle. And fortunately enough, I had a friend who was in the same boat. His name's Anthony. And he said, I'm going through the same things. Would you mind if I came with you? And both of us left from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and walked with rucksacks or our backpacks, and trekked from Wisconsin to California over 5 months. And through that process, I think we really made some progress. But towards the end of that, I really came to the understanding that this was just the beginning of my healing process, and it's not really a destination, to be healed. And I always think it's funny when people are like, "Oh, are you better?" And it's just like it's just this constant refinement of yourself and your understanding of the trauma and how it impacted you. And you really have to you get granular on the things that have impacted you. And that takes you into yourself and deeper exploration of who you are, and most importantly, who you're not. And I think a lot of the experiences traumatic experiences that people experience shows them who they're not, and really shows what they stand for, and what their moral structure is made of. And sometimes that gets shaken to the core. And you start asking the hard questions. Why me, and how can I get better, and what can I do to feel better? And those are the important questions, and that's what we were able to do over the time that we were walking across the country.
And you sought different, I guess, avenues, modalities, therapies, different. What worked for you? What did you find was the most healing of all of the things you learned?
So I tried all sorts of different therapies, cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, different things like that. But I found a lot of success in meditation. And that was something that was important to me because it was a self-practice. And I wasn't, when I left the military, I kind of threw everything out with it. And, along with that was the discipline and a lot of the things that were helpful, like exercise and all those things that are actually really healthy for you. So meditation was something that I could start reinstilling discipline into my life. So I was taught a practice, a mantra-based meditation while I was walking across the country. And it was the first time I felt any kind of relief from the stress that I was feeling from, the day-to-day stressors that we experience. So I knew that I was on to something, and that it was up to me to make it work. People just need to get through whatever barriers they put up around it, or preconceived notions. Because at that point I was like, okay, I'm going to try whatever I can, regardless of what I look like, or how ridiculous I feel like I look. But like, I just wanted to feel better. And you have to kind of get to that point of saying, it doesn't matter what it is, I'm going to try. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to keep going. I'm keep going to try something different. Right. So we help. The nice thing about these practices is that there are so many different varieties and, different paths to meditation and yoga. So there's something for everyone. You just have to be a little bit disciplined about it, and find something that makes you feel good.
Obviously, I've never experienced the trauma that you've experienced, but I have experienced trauma, and for the longest time, I lived in my head. I felt like I didn't know what was happening around me. And I just,
right.
And then, people talk about meditation. I'm like, I don't know if I could just sit still. I have to be productive. I need to be doing something. Otherwise, I'm a failure. Just this year, went into therapy in Arizona and focused on trauma therapy. And I meditated every single day. And I was like, this is really hard. But then I did it every single day. Probably within a week and a half, 2 weeks of me really trying, I began to, everything was very clear. I was more aware of where I was, what was really beautiful around me. I was present. I was no longer walking into a room and not understanding how I got there.
So it's really important that you mentioned that, we disassociate ourselves from our body, and we're just all in the mind space, and we have to understand the conditioning that makes us that way. So let's look at the society that we live in. It's all about being productive, and it's all about accomplishing and growing and doing better and bigger and different things. And meditation is not that. Meditation is sitting and being with yourself and observing the mind and observing the thoughts. And the way that I was trained is that the physical practice of yoga releases stress and tension in the body solely for the purpose of sitting for meditation. So we have to be able to understand the nature of the mind and how it impacts us. And to be able to do that, we have to look at our conditioning. How are we raised? And and the things that we believe in, and why do we believe those things. So that goes back to the study of yoga as well, which is, self-study. So all these things that are going on with us, we have to start asking questions about why. Why do we believe the things that we do? How were we raised, and how are those things, how are we conditioned? Like, those are the things that we need to look at, and that helps us understand why we might be holding on to things, and why we might be judging ourselves, and why we're not able to forgive ourselves, and all the different things that create trauma in our body.
Yeah, I found that to be life-changing, understanding that.
Yeah.
What was your favorite part about your 2,700-mile journey? I think that's amazing.
I think the most amazing part about all of it was the support that we got from people that didn't even know us. So Anthony and I had set out on the first day. I think our rucksacks were about 90 pounds because we packed like no one was going to support us. We found out very quickly that we had to have lighter rucksacks to make it. So basically, we had to surrender to the situation and hope that people would show support, and whether that was bringing us water, or a lot of people opened their homes to us so that we could do laundry or have a bed to sleep in and shower and different things, and people who had no idea who we were. So that was amazing. And with all the things that we see in the media today, and everyone talks about how divided we are, and as we were walking across the country, I didn't experience that. Everyone who we talked to, except maybe a few outliers, were really supportive of what we were doing. And that was really amazing for us. And that, as veterans, gave us hope. It gave us hope for the country, because we're told that we're divided and people don't like each other, and but the majority of the people I went, and that was across 7 states, were nothing but supportive, and supportive of the people who are serving, and supportive of their communities. And I think that really gave us faith, because coming out of war, you're pretty cynical, and you see the worst that humanity has to offer, and you kind of bring that back with you, and you don't trust people, and you don't trust people refer to it as a civilian population, and there's a lack of trust there. So this was a huge point for us to be able to say, look, these people that don't even know us are being of service, and that's what we, at least Anthony and I, joined the military to do, is to be of service to a greater cause, and to help people who need help, and help people who might not have the means to help themselves, or who are being oppressed. So that was such a relief, and really transformed us, I think. Really brought the walls down, so we could really connect with people again.
Wow, that sounds really uplifting. It really does sound amazing. The people, strangers, were as supportive as they were to other strangers. After everything that you've learned, you're doing a lot for the veteran community. What are you doing to help?
Right now, I'm volunteering for an organization called Vet Toga. So Vet Toga is a veteran-run yoga school. So it's a 200-hour yoga teacher training for any veterans that are interested in the healing arts. It's a very comprehensive, intensive 200-hour training program. So I'm helping by sharing my experience with other veterans, and then we go out into our communities, and we teach courses. Not so much these days, but a lot of it's online now. But we would go out and train veterans to be able to teach yoga and meditation classes, and then in turn they go and volunteer in their communities to provide stress management classes for veterans and their families.
Doing these yoga classes and finding your way of healing from PTSD, is there besides this organization, is there from the Department of Veterans Affairs and how to transition back? I know that they really focus on transitioning back into civilian life through, resume building and how to dress and all of the kind of superficial stuff, I feel.
Right.
Do you feel that they do enough transitioning back into civilian life mentally and emotionally?
Well, I feel that since I've separated from the Army, the VA has gotten better. There's definitely room for improvement. The problem is you can help someone write a resume, but if they're still dealing with trauma and stress, it doesn't matter how good their resume is, because their actions and behaviors, in the workplace become challenging for employers. So again, I'm going back to, proper stress management techniques and accountability. The unfortunate thing is that the VA, at least since I've separated from the military, has been politicized. Veterans are essentially used as props during election season and then, thrown to the curb or try to strip funding away from, taking care of them, which is really unfortunate. And it's sad that, we have governments that are okay with sending our sons and daughters to war, but refuse to take care of them or take responsibility for the consequences of war, which the men and women who have fought have to shoulder that burden, and their families as well. A lot of people don't think about the families, but they suffer along with the veteran as well. So a lot of families are suffering in silence, and they don't know how to reach out or how to connect with proper services, because the VA doesn't provide any care for family members, unfortunately.
What is the best mental health advice for anyone interested in joining the armed forces?
If you're thinking about joining the military, and I kind of have this personal stance of, I'm not going to dissuade anyone from signing up and being of service. But there are things you need to take in consideration. What's going on politically, what's going on globally. Right now, probably going to be off with this number, but I think the United States military has a presence in something like 150 countries, 140 countries, something like that. So chances are you're going to be deployed somewhere at some time. So if you're going in, really think about the strategies you have for managing stress. Military inherently is a stressful situation. Combat is stressful. They do their best to prepare you for that, but you're going to encounter situations that aren't in training that you're going to have to deal with and manage, and you're going to have leadership challenging leadership and a lot of those things. So really figuring out, all right, how do I manage stress? And what are my best strategies for doing that before you go in? And those are the things that are important. If I'd had it my way, I'd have some sort of stress management strategies in place in basic training. Also, kind of moving into deployment. Also having ways that soldiers, sailors, airmen are able to manage during deployment, and then when they get home as well, and then lastly during separation. So there needs to be this kind of cycle of stress management and decompression that needs to happen. And I think shorter deployments is a good start, but we really need to change the mindset of the military for them to understand that asking for help is not a weakness. If you want to take care of your soldiers, you need to understand that you need to have them be able to move through their stress and see how they can manage it on their own. And that's building strength and character, right? Especially with leaders. If you're in a leadership situation and you understand that one of your men or women are struggling, right? As a leader, how can I be a good leader to make sure that one, they're managing their stress. 2, I understand what's going on and I have like a good pulse of what's going on with the people that I'm in charge of, and to be able to bring everyone together to support each other. There's the phrase "no man left behind," so that should apply too with mental health, right? So we shouldn't be kicking people out of the military because they're struggling with mental health, and we need to figure out ways to move through it, and that's true strength.
Wow, that is so valuable. Thank you for that advice. And for anyone listening, is there anything else that you would want to share with our audience?
Yeah, I just think that just generally speaking, we all have traumatic events in our life. And I think the most important thing that I've come across is not to compare your trauma to someone else's. We all have really unique experiences, and we can't sit there and be like, well, your trauma is worse than mine, so therefore I'm not going to talk about mine, right? We all have different resiliency barriers, right? So some people can take on a lot of stress and tension and they're okay with that. Other people, not so much. So we have to understand that what might not impact us negatively could really be detrimental to someone else. Right. So that's something important when you're discussing your trauma or talking to someone about it. That's something that I just run into talking to veterans a lot. And, some people, the first thing they'll say is, I haven't been through what you've been through. And, you're not here to invalidate your experiences, so it's important to understand that, we all have stress and trauma, and this is part of life, and that we should all be able to openly discuss, our struggles. So thank you so much.
I can't tell you how much I've learned from you, and I'm just an amazing, valuable conversation with you. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Tom Voss, trauma survivor, thriver, veterans, mental health advocate, and author, among so many accomplishments. And if you would like to learn more about Tom and his book, Where the War Ends, please visit my website, ATSTpodcast.com. That's the letter A, ATSTpodcast.com. Also, if you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, please text HOME to 741-741. I also encourage you to check out my Patreon community at patreon.com/trauma survivor thrivers unite. This is not a substitute for professional help, but an extra resource where you could have full access to me and just be your most authentic self. Thank you so much for listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. I'm Lori Lee Bidstock. Take care.